At present, the United States of America is currently considered the world's most powerful nation on Earth. America is also considered to be something of a modern-day empire, which is epitomized by the Empire State Building, famous for once being the tallest building in the world, and which stands inside New York City, also referred to as the Empire State. Commentators sometimes claim that America is the modern-day equivalent of the Roman Empire, which once spanned from England in the west right across all of Europe, down through northern Africa, and into parts of the Middle East. But then, after suffering from a string of crazy emperors, some of whom are thought to have been mentally unstable, the Roman Empire began to crumble. Eventually, the empire fell. Now here's the question. Will America suffer the same fate under its current president, Donald J. Trump? After all, Trump is famous for saying some pretty crazy stuff. For instance, he recently posted a picture of himself as the Pope. To understand whether Donald Trump might be leading America to ruin, we need to understand whether he is acting and behaving like the crazy Roman emperors who led Rome to its ruin, one of whom was Caligula. Throughout this video, I want you to keep the following question in mind. Is Donald Trump leading America towards ruin? Much like Caligula did when he ruled Rome. You can post your thoughts in the comments section at the end of this video, and we can then look at what other people think about the future of America under Donald Trump's rulership. To do this, though, we need to start by looking closely at the life and rulership of one of Rome's most notoriously crazy emperors, namely Caligula. Picture this. A young Roman emperor declares war on the ocean itself, ordering his soldiers to stab at the waves and collect seashells as spoils of war. He builds a temporary bridge just to ride his horse across a bay in triumph, then names his favorite horse as consul, the second most powerful position in Rome. And for the grand finale, he starts believing that he's a living god and demands that people worship him as such. If this sounds like the plot of a Netflix series that went completely off the rails, I'm afraid not. This was in fact the reign of one of history's most unhinged rulers, Caligula, Rome's third emperor. Welcome to what can only be described as the most expensive midlife crisis in human history, except it happened when he was only 24 years of age, and it cost the Roman Empire its treasury, its dignity, and very nearly its existence. Welcome back to Ancient Rome Revisited. I'm your host, Marcus Aurelius, and my God, am I glad that Caligula's life ended in bloodshed, something which I'll explain to you at the end of this video. Today, I'm going to tell you the story about the early rise and spectacular fall of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, or Little Boots, as he was affectionately known within the Roman army. In this episode, we'll explore how one of Rome's most beloved little boys transformed into a tyrant so deranged that his own bodyguards decided enough was enough. From his traumatic childhood in the shadow of imperial politics, to his meteoric rise to power, and finally to the mind-bending catalogue of insanity that turned him into something of a legend. This is the story of how absolute power didn't just corrupt absolutely, it went completely and utterly beeping insane. Before we begin, though, if you love ancient Roman history and have not yet subscribed to this channel, then please do so now. That way you'll never miss another episode of Ancient Rome Revisited. Okay, let's meet the young Caligula before he went batshit crazy, shall we? The boy in little boots. Let me start with a question. How do you think a future emperor should spend his childhood? Maybe learning languages, studying philosophy, or practicing statecraft. Well, Caligula had a very different childhood experience. He was born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, named after the great Julius Caesar himself, but his father's soldiers affectionately nicknamed him Caligula, meaning little boots, during his travels with his father on military campaigns as a child. Imagine this. The caliga was a leather boot worn by the soldiers up to the rank of officer. The emperor got his nickname when he was only 2 years old, during a mutiny in his father's camp by the Rhine legions in 14 AD. Imagine a toddler waddling around a military camp in tiny soldier boots. It's like seeing a kid dressed in a mini firefighter's uniform down at the station, except this kid was destined to rule the world. The soldiers who served with Germanicus affectionately gave the nickname Caligula, or Little Boots, to young Gaius, as a way of endearment and to acknowledge his association with the military. He was essentially the army's mascot, and the soldiers adored him. But here's the thing about childhood nicknames. They have a way of sticking around. Although Caligula had a keen interest in military affairs, he was uncomfortable with the moniker, and after assuming the throne, he used his full name with honorifics, Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Gaius really didn't like the nickname, and when he became emperor, he would punish anyone who dared use it. Nothing says stable leadership like executing people for using your childhood nickname. But young Caligula's life took a dark turn early. When Gaius was only 7, his father mysteriously died while serving in Antioch. Germanicus died in Antioch in 19, and Agrippina returned with her 6 children to Rome, where she became entangled in a bitter feud with Emperor Tiberius. This wasn't just losing a parent. This was losing a parent in the snake pit of Roman imperial politics, where mysterious deaths were often not so mysterious. Growing up in this environment was like being raised in a real-life Game of Thrones. Family members disappeared, were exiled, or were met with unfortunate accidents. The kid who once charmed soldiers with his tiny boots was now navigating a world where trust was a luxury few could afford, and paranoia was a survival skill. It's almost like he was being trained from birth to become either a great leader or a complete psychopath. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the first option. The rise of Little Boots. Fast forward to 37 AD, and our boy Caligula is about to inherit the keys to the Roman Empire. His rise to power was as swift as it was bloody, with the untimely demise of Emperor Tiberius paving the way for Caligula's reign. At the tender age of 24, he found himself the master of the Roman world, greeted with adulation and hope. Now, imagine being 24 years old and suddenly becoming the most powerful person on earth. Most 24-year-olds today are still trying to figure out how to do their own taxes or whether they should get a gym membership. Caligula was handed control of the entire Mediterranean world, complete with unlimited funds and the power of life and death over millions of people. What could possibly go wrong? Initially, it seemed like Rome had struck gold. The people were absolutely thrilled. After years of Tiberius's increasingly paranoid and reclusive rule, here was a young, charismatic emperor from a beloved military family. The people yearned for a leader who would steer them away from the darkness of the previous reign. Caligula started strong. He recalled political exiles, gave generous bonuses to the Praetorian Guard, and threw spectacular games for the masses. It was like the ultimate honeymoon period, and Rome was smitten. But here's where our story takes a sharp turn and heads straight down into Crazy Town. Within months, his behavior shifted dramatically, and he quickly became infamous for his wild and crazy antics. Some historians suggest he may have suffered a severe illness that affected his mind, while others believe the pressure and paranoia of imperial power simply broke him. Either way, what happened next was like watching a Netflix series jump the shark, except the shark was filled with taxpayer money, and the consequences were very, very real. The descent into madness. Let me paint you a picture of what crazy looked like in imperial Rome. We're not talking about eccentric hobby collecting or unusual fashion choices. We're talking about a level of unhinged behavior that would make modern tabloids blush. First, let's talk about money, or rather, how to spectacularly waste it. Caligula inherited a massive treasury surplus from the fiscally responsible Tiberius. Within a year, he had blown through it all. How, you ask? Well, imagine if Jeff Bezos decided to spend his entire fortune on the world's most expensive parties. And you're getting close. Caligula threw gladiatorial games that made the Super Bowl halftime show look like a school talent show. He built temporary bridges across bays just so he could ride across them in triumph. According to Suetonius, Caligula, in his infinite profligacy, once constructed a temporary floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae just so he could ride triumphantly from one end to the other. But the spending was just the beginning. Some accounts suggest that he believed himself to be a living god, and that he executed people who failed to acknowledge his divinity. Picture this. You're a Roman citizen going about your day, and suddenly you're expected to worship your emperor as if he's Zeus. It's like if your boss decided they were a deity and demanded you pray to them before every meeting. Except in Rome, refusing could get you a very permanent pink slip. And then there was his relationship with his horse, Incitatus. Now, I love pets as much as the next person, but Caligula took it to a whole new level. Legend has it that he planned to make his horse a consul, essentially the vice president of Rome. Imagine explaining to the Senate that their new colleague was a four-legged animal who communicated exclusively through neighing. It's like appointing your golden retriever as Secretary of State, because they're really good at fetching. The taxation under Caligula was equally insane. Caligula taxed taverns, artisans, and most infamously, a tax on prostitutes and their pimps, who were liable for a sum equivalent to a single interaction, if you get my drift. He was basically taxing everything that moved, and some things that didn't. Citizens of provincial Italy lost their previous tax exemptions. Most individual tax bills were fairly small but cumulative. But over Caligula's brief reign, taxes were doubled. It's like if the government decided to tax your Netflix subscription, your coffee habit, and your ability to breathe. But perhaps the most bizarre episode was his war against Neptune, the god of the sea. Caligula literally declared war on the ocean. He ordered his soldiers to march to the English Channel and attack the waves with their swords, collecting seashells as spoils of war. Imagine being a battle-hardened Roman legionnaire, having fought Germanic tribes and conquered territories, and your emperor orders you to stab the ocean. It's like being a Navy SEAL and being told your next mission is to intimidate a puddle. The man who once charmed soldiers as little boots was now forcing those same soldiers to commit acts so absurd that they probably wondered if they were stuck in some kind of ancient Roman version of a bad reality TV show. Josephus claims that this led to riotous protests at the circus. The people were not amused, and who could blame them? The paranoid god-emperor. As if the financial ruin and oceanic warfare weren't enough, Caligula's paranoia reached levels that would make a conspiracy theorist blush. Caligula's obsession with power and his apparent paranoia have also been cited as evidence of his insanity. He began seeing enemies everywhere, real or imagined. Senate meetings became exercises in terror, where a wrong look or an insufficiently enthusiastic response to his divine status could mean death. He developed this habit of inviting senators to elaborate dinners, then casually mentioning how easy it would be to have them killed on the spot. It's like hosting a dinner party where you keep reminding your guests that you could poison their soup any time you wanted. Not exactly the kind of atmosphere that encourages honest political discourse. The emperor also became obsessed with his appearance and divine status. He would dress up as various gods, complete with costumes and props, and demand that people worship him accordingly. One day he'd be Jupiter, the next he'd be Neptune. It was like a one-man comic con, except attendance was mandatory and the consequences of not showing proper enthusiasm were fatal. Perhaps most disturbing was his treatment of his own family. Caligula's relationship with his sisters was complicated, to put it mildly. Without going into inappropriate details, let's just say that his concept of family bonds would have made even the most dysfunctional families of today look like the Brady Bunch, the breaking point. You might be wondering, how did this madness finally end? Well, even in ancient Rome, there were limits to what people would tolerate. Even then, the revenue was nowhere near enough, and the imposition was deeply resented by Rome's commoners. The treasury was empty, the people were starving, the military was demoralized, and the Senate was terrified. But the final straw came when Caligula's paranoia turned toward the very people responsible for his safety, the Praetorian Guard. These were the emperor's personal bodyguards, the ancient Roman equivalent of the Secret Service. When you start threatening the people whose job it is to keep you alive, you're essentially writing your own death warrant with a very sharp sword. On January 24th, 41 AD, after less than 4 years in power, Caligula was assassinated by members of his own Praetorian Guard. The man who had once been Rome's beloved Little Boots was stabbed to death in an underground corridor of his own palace. His wife and infant daughter were also murdered, ensuring that his line would not continue. The assassination was swift and brutal, but perhaps most telling was the reaction of the Roman people. There was no mourning, no calls for justice, no demands to hunt down the killers. Instead, there was relief. The nightmare was over. The legacy of madness. So what can we learn from the story of Caligula? Well, for starters, absolute power really does corrupt absolutely, especially when you hand it to someone who's barely old enough to rent a car. But more importantly, Caligula's reign serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of institutional safeguards. In just under 4 years, Caligula managed to bankrupt the Roman Empire, terrorize the Senate, demoralize the military, and turn the population against the imperial system. He proved that even the mightiest empire in the world was only as strong as its weakest leader. His reign was so traumatic that it took Rome decades to fully recover financially and politically. So what went so badly wrong, and why are historians still debating his time in power 2,000 years later? The answer lies in the complex interplay of childhood trauma, unlimited power, and possibly mental illness. Some modern historians suggest that Caligula may have suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy, bipolar disorder, or even brain damage from an illness. Others argue that the sources describing his madness were exaggerated by later writers who wanted to justify his assassination. But regardless of the exact cause, Caligula's story reminds us that power without accountability is a recipe for disaster. Whether we're talking about ancient Rome or modern democracies, the lesson remains the same. Nobody should be above the law, and no one person should have unlimited power over others. Conclusion: infamous beyond all measure. And there you have it, the incredible, terrible, and utterly insane story of Caligula, Rome's craziest emperor. From a beloved child mascot earning the nickname Little Boots, to a deranged tyrant who declared war on the ocean and tried to make his horse a consul, Caligula's reign was a masterclass in how not to rule an empire. Emperor Caligula has been immortalized as one of history's most cruel and erratic leaders. His story has fascinated historians, writers, and filmmakers for centuries, and for good reason. It's a tale that has everything: political intrigue, family drama, incredible wealth, spectacular failure, and enough bizarre incidents to fill a dozen Hollywood movies. The boy who once charmed Roman soldiers with his tiny military boots grew up to become a monster who brought the world's greatest empire to its knees. His reign lasted less than 4 years, but its impact echoed through Roman history for generations. It's a reminder that leadership is not about power or privilege. It's about responsibility, wisdom, and the humility to recognize that no one person, no matter how powerful, is above the law or beyond the reach of consequences. So the next time you hear someone complaining about modern politicians, just remember Caligula. At least your representatives aren't trying to make their pets senators or declaring war on bodies of water. Though given the way things are going, maybe we shouldn't tempt fate. Let's now return to the question that I posed to you at the beginning of this video. And the question was this: is Donald Trump leading America towards ruin, much like Caligula did? Can you think of any of Donald Trump's actions or behaviours that are, in any way, similar to Caligula's? Might Donald Trump's picture of himself posing as the Pope be similar to Caligula thinking of himself as a god? What other actions or behaviours might link Donald Trump to Caligula? Let us know in the comments whether you think there are other similarities between these two rulers. And let's hope for all our sakes that Donald Trump does not lead America into ruin, much like Caligula did with Rome. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most notorious reigns. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient Roman madness, make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more stories from the dark side of history. Trust me, when it comes to crazy rulers in ancient Rome, Caligula was just the beginning. There's far more to come. I'll see you in the next video.